Esteve Pannetier. Welcome,
Yeah,
hello.
thank you. You said it right. You said it right. That's unusual in the English-speaking world that people say my name right. You've obviously practiced, Tim. Well done.
I've practiced, and let's give a brief introduction to everyone listening. Esteve is a consultant, trainer, speaker, and designer. He is the co-founder of Green Elephant that helps the world's business leaders and leading teams transform the way they communicate. And Esteve has dedicated more than 2 decades to decoding the chemistry of human connection. And I'm so excited to have him on the show. Esteve, welcome to the Couply Relationship Advice podcast, my dude.
Thank you, Tim. And probably you have a few questions about what on earth that intro actually means, what is like this whole connection thing. But yes, I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Decoding the chemistry of human connection. How did you begin to get into this journey?
Well, can I share a short story, or are we?
Yeah.
Are we? The
Oh yeah.
if you look back to this is actually back in World War Two, 1943, Battle of Britain. The bombers are coming over from Germany, and you've got these planes who are these incredibly big, like horsepower engine, 800 horsepower, like amazing engineering feats. And on both sides, they were pretty much a match. The factories were pumping out those aeroplanes. And the Allied commandment in London at the time were having a huge problem with training pilots. And what they did is that they went to Loughborough University, which is where I studied, and they went to see some of these cognitive psychologists and said, "Look, could you fix the training program? Could you help us learn how to quickly train these young pilots? Because we have planes coming out of the factories, but we can't train pilots fast enough." So these psychologists and physiologists started looking at the interface of airplanes, and they realized that number one, humans are incredibly adaptable. That works also in relationships. People adapt to each other all the time. And therefore, a bad engineering design doesn't really show until you really have a death or a problem in the interface, because people adapt to a bad interface. So they thought, what if we changed the paradigm and adapted the machine to the human? And that was the birth of a new discipline called ergonomics. So I'm an ergonomist, and the idea is that I'm here to study how to adapt something, whether it's a human interface or a machine interface, a human-computer interface, a mouse or anything like that, to actually adapt it to how people work, rather than expecting people to do the heavy lifting of adapting to something that's badly designed. And that affects, and I studied this with machines. Obviously, the whole thing is all about machines, but actually when you look at it, the fundamental interface that needs a lot of work is the human-to-human interface. Before we start adding tools and phones and tech in between, the problem we have is that how do we actually adapt to each other? How do we get people to adapt their communication and interface relations to each other? So I'm a specialist in those interfaces, and since 1943 the discipline's moved a lot further forward, and now we understand that there's a lot more to it than just cognitive psychology. There's a whole load of things that we're still studying on that field, and that's why I talk about interface of humans rather than just relations or communication.
The interface of humans. And so looking into this, what are some of the common things that you see in the ways that humans interface, and like what are the disconnects? And I know that you do a lot in the business space, but I think I know you also you're very passionate about the relationship space, and this is why we got you on. So what are the interface flaws that you frequently see?
Well, if we take the parallel with tech, we talk a lot about in tech the black box. People, they don't know what's going on in the computer, particularly nowadays with ChatGPT. There's this whole black box. Same thing with humans. When humans are interacting, they have their own inner world that they often don't know, which is interfering with their relations. So you might be bringing to the table your past traumas. One might be bringing our own limiting beliefs, judgments, values, and that black box of humans is affecting actually way more than we know the relation and communication between people in a relationship or couple. So I've also been studying a lot the couples, and I mean couples in the sense of intimate relations, because that's where it's the most visible when the problems occur. So the black box is one of the big problems. So therefore, how do you learn about the black box is looking at personal growth, which is all about what you've been working on with Couply here, is the personal growth around what's going on inside me.
One of the really interesting things about couples work versus how you show up in the office is that it seems like, and I've had conversations with people where they mention this, And sometimes people say something like, if I treated my friends, if I treated my colleagues in the same way that I treated my partner at my worst, I'd be fired from my job and I wouldn't have any friends. Right? But there is something, I don't want to say infantile, that's the wrong word, but there's something raw and childlike that gets exposed in our romantic relationships that doesn't get exposed in the same way in our work relationships and even in our friendships. There's almost like a veneer that we're typically able to keep up. Some people let the veneer drop and then maybe they do get fired. But it's a very interesting dynamic. Is this something that you've seen?
Absolutely, and I think I mean that is also true with work colleagues who've been, like startup co-founders. You see the same thing happening when two founders work together. You've probably been there as well. Like, they drop the mask. They go when shit hits the fan, the stress is high, bioenergies are low. It's been a rough day and there's bad news coming in straight away. Yes, those two co-founders might have exactly the same problem as a couple, in fact. So I think it's a factor of the level of intimacy and trust that people have. Then they drop the mask and real stuff starts to become interfering with the quality of relations. Yeah, I've definitely seen that too.
The co-founder thing is interesting. If anyone here is listening and you've started a business with a friend, or anytime you start a business with someone, it is the relationship dynamic is different. It's different to anything else. And people always say like, oh, like it feels like a marriage. And yeah, it essentially is. And so many of my fellow co-founders, I'm in like a lot of startup community stuff as a you, and I know so many founders in the community that were like, oh my God, we did a bunch of the Couply personality tests. We even answered some of the questions about like values and stuff. And like, it's been really helpful to know this information about my co-founder. One day we'll do it. I'm saying it now. Founderly will happen, and we'll build that product eventually. But it's very interesting because when you're building something with someone and you're spending that amount of time with them with that amount of pressure, you're right. These rawer places like do get exposed too. And so, what are the big conflicts that you see, or what are the big problems? Are there like frequent problems that you see that apply to both?
I think what are the universal ones? So I started measuring actually conflicts because working in the space of communication, often people don't want to talk about communication until there's a problem. So we measure where the problems occur, conflicts, and to our great surprise, we found that the biggest problem actually is not people's personality, culture, values, gender, or all those variables that people tend to name as being the source of the problem. It's actually people's behavior. And it's an invisible one because everybody says, well, duh, yeah, but the behavior is linked to all the others because one's personality, if I'm an introvert, if my introversion is high, I might behave in a more quiet way, and therefore people might think that I'm being negative or dismissive, but it might also be a cultural reason that my behavior changes. So whether it's cultural, whether it's behavior based on a personality or a context or a bad day, the thing that triggers people most is generally behavior that they start to give a meaning to. So like the reason I talked about the black box is that it's a lot to do with self-talk. Objectively, we have 11 senses, not 5, and those 11 senses are bringing data across to people. But the real problem starts when we start to give it meaning and that we give a story to that, what's happening. Let's say that you start to interrupt me. If I was in France, I would give the meaning that that's enthusiasm. If I'm in Finland, I would say that's being rude. It's cultural and context dependent. Now, that self-talk is the reason why a lot of the time people break down in their connection without even realize the source of it. That behavior is triggering a narrative of self-talk that people start to go like, well, that's obviously why, without checking.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like, yeah, go on, Esteve, go on.
Yeah, I was just like, because there's a slight delay. That's why I think the whole checking of assumptions, people often say, you should check your assumptions. I would go even further. I would say you can't check all the assumptions. There's always assumptions being made because otherwise we just have this insane conversation of checking assumptions all the time. I think the rule we use is if you don't check assumptions, at least take responsibility for the unchecked and the wrong ones. So that let's say that I'm interrupting you and that you make the assumption that I was being rude, that's on you to check that it was that or not. And that simple little rule of thumb shifts a lot of those interactions into a more positive state of, okay, I didn't know, I'll just check, and that's fine.
And we see this happen in relationships, and it becomes a game of finding the bad guy. People seek out, if it's like, people seek out the confirmation. They have confirmation bias. And so if they start a negative narrative and they're playing a game of find the bad guy, then you'll start to seek out examples to support your negative hypothesis, which then creates this loop, because then you're looking for the negative examples to support your negative hypothesis, and then you're acting, your subconscious is like, see, I told you, this person doesn't have your best interests at heart, or whatever this negative narrative is. You're then like now looking for things to tie in and fill it up, and your partner can feel this, and they're starting to, they can feel this subconsciously. They know that you're being off with them, and they can feel that you're nitpicking at things that you didn't used to, and they say, and then they start pulling out the always and nevers, right? Mm-hmm. They're like, you always do this, because they've managed to pull in some examples. Maybe it's, and it might not be consistent, but it builds up into this overarching negative narrative, right?
And then it opens up Pandora box upon Pandora box of what's going on inside of one's head, which is why we initially started with this periodic table of communication, where the bottom, all these white elements at the bottom that we have is I'm not going to show it because it's too.
Oh yes, look at this.
But all these blocks are basically little mental models that, if you learn about it, unlocks a completely new way of interacting. Like, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
If you take conflict, which we talked about earlier, the word tension is more accurate. Like, there's a tension between people. If you live in Finland, generally you'll think of a conflict as a bad or negative. Conflict avoidant cultures label conflicts as all bad. Now, that mental model, that's a belief. It's nothing real. It's just a limiting belief. If I unlock that and I go, okay, let's relabel it with a metaphor. You play music, you have a guitar, there's a string. Let's imagine that two people are in a tension like a guitar string. If there's no tension, it sounds like, there's no music. If there's a tension between people that's well tuned, is harmonious, you have beautiful music in that relation. Now, if it's too high pitch, if it's too much tension, it's like, not nice. So it's about having the right level of tension, and how you use that tension is going to determine if that conflict or that tension is going to become a functional one, meaning building trust, good quality relations, or is it going to destroy the trust? Now, people who don't know that avoid all conflicts, and they also waste opportunities to create incredibly good, well, vulnerability, as Brené Brown talks about, but also trust opportunities. You can't get into a relation without jumping in and having those tensions that can be uncomfortable. So that little mental model, I could draw it on a table in 10 minutes, and a leader could suddenly, or in a couple, it's also the same dynamic. You could literally shift how you approach tensions by just reframing it with a mental model. So that's what I've been doing. I've been gathering these really practical, field level, not like theoretical, but the ones that people in real life are using to understand interactions, and I'm collecting them and putting them into YouTube as little videos or doodles and stuff. So there's so many different ones that we could open up, but I think the conflicts, the stages of relationship, the types of love, those kind of ones that we talked about when we first met, are all literally unlocking of a video game. Like, if we're in a video game in a relationship, they all open up new possibilities of really yummy interactions once we drop our beliefs about what it is and what it isn't.
These yummy interactions as well. I like that as a reframe, but it's difficult if a partnership has a pattern, a very established pattern, very established dance steps that they like to go back into in their conflict. Sometimes couples have been together for 5-10 years and they have arguments in their very specific way, and it's not healthy, it's not working, it's not improving their relationship. So, like, what are some of the steps that people can do to begin to unwind perhaps bad patterns and start to put in these mental models to reframe conflict as a yummy conversation.
So I just put a disclaimer out there, because in our team we have a therapist who would probably tell me off for simplifying these things to, generalize, because these are big, deep topics that can be really hard to tackle with just a ready-made piece of advice. But one generally is to sort of look and separate what is mine and from what is other. For example, if I have a limiting belief, or if I have an unfulfilled need, let's say I have a need for intimacy, and I'm not able to understand that need or even label it, what will probably happen is that I project that to the partner, and I make the other responsible for that need being fulfilled. And that locks me into an impossible pattern, because they can't fulfill my need. I have to take first ownership of that need. The second thing is to not judge those needs. Like, people start to negotiate their needs. My need for intimacy versus your need for freedom, or my need for companionship versus your need for security. Those needs cannot be compared or negotiated, because they are fundamental human, in a way, rights, and it's up to oneself to take full ownership and turn up in the relation where I'm not making the other one accountable for my needs. When that happens, opens up a completely different dynamic, which is usually less conflictual and more based on what I would call a conscious relationship, which is quite rare to see, but it requires the courage to take responsibility for one's needs, including the emotional needs.
And that means sort of coming to your partner in a like a little bit more of a rawer way, in terms of saying, like, hey, this is something that I need. Like, here's how I'm feeling about it, and this is, I mean, maybe you're proposing solutions, maybe not. Maybe you're just saying, this is how I'm feeling about this, and you want to let your partner know. It's not easy, though. Let's not pretend it's easy. Especially if you haven't done this, especially if you've been in a relationship with like 5 years with someone, maybe.
And you mentioned about, how the other one might sort of perceive you. I think generally what happens is that we forget that there is a verbal level, what I say, a non-verbal, which is how I say it, the behavior, the sort of tone of voice is like, I love you. It's different than I love you, right? And then at the same time, there's the intent behind it, which is my focus. And what happens is that 80% of what we communicate is not verbal, it's the non-verbal and intent. So what people are doing when they're looking at their partner, they know them off by heart, and they're looking at the alignment between the verbal and the non-verbal. If the sound doesn't match the picture, generally we trust the non-verbal, and that's when it creates these sort of what we call cognitive dissonance, to be fancy words, but in simple terms it means that you don't trust that the person is really being genuine, because their words don't echo with how they say them. And that's a sign that we have a need that, for example, in general terms, it helps to distinguish between what belongs to me and what belongs to the partner. So, for example, if I don't know what the partner wants, needs, or is thinking, rather than assume the worst, to acknowledge that I don't know is a good step, and go, when I don't know, I'm going to assume the best, given a credit of intention, is generally the only way out of a tricky situation. What people tend to do, at work at least, is that they give a trial of intention. They say, if I don't know, I'm assuming the worst. And therefore, what do? You lower yourself to the common worst denominator, and it creates a fight. But if you go, okay, I don't, let's say you and I are in a relation, Tim. Let's say, I don't know
the
why
dream.
You're wonderful. It would be great. We could telepathically read, but we don't. We don't telepathically read. We'd have to sort of talk. And I might come home one day and you're saying to me like, I'm really happy to see you, and your body language is screaming that you're upset about something. I might think that it's about me, but what actually might happen is you had a bad day. So I could say, just to check my assumptions, I'm assuming that you there's something going on that you're not yet sharing about why. Is there a need or something you want to share, and without taking it personally. The minute I take something personally, that's it. We're down a negative spiral. So it's really hard, but that is actually very, very powerful, to be able to say, what you feel right now is yours. I can respect it, I can hear it, but as soon as I judge it or start to think that it's belonging to me, then we start to have this impossible loop.
You mentioned earlier about the 5 senses, and there's actually 11, and I get the sense that if I want to know what other six are. I want to know what those other six are, because I feel like it ties into how you communicate the messages to get it understood, not just from like a mental aspect, but maybe like in a deeper aspect, or be able to connect deeply when you're trying to get these sort of messages across.
Well, I mean, like, as I said, I'm an ergonomist, so basically I look at it really pragmatically. Like, if we look at objectively in relations to people, there is only the sensorial information that is objective. Everything else is subjective distortion, subject to our own storytelling in our head. And it's all in our imaginary realm. So if we start from the real thing, there's those 11 senses. Well, the Greek senses, which actually I'll show you my journal because I have it open here. Look,
amazing.
Here we go. Can you actually see?
And for those listening to this on Spotify, feel free to watch on video on Spotify. You can see this. You can see Esteve right now. And if you're watching on YouTube, then perfect. I've already got this in. But for those listening, Esteve is also going to walk us through some images of his journal here.
So this is like my latest this is just introspection that I'm doing about the senses, because I realized that I crossed those different types of love, those different types of connection between people with what are the actual senses, because I wanted to see if there's any playgrounds I haven't explored in relations. And so, the obvious are the eyes, the sound, the touch, the taste, and the smell. Those five are the ones that everybody, talks about, and are still taught in school, by the way, today. But then we also know that nociception is a sense of its own, separate to touch, so pain. Anybody who's doing BDSM knows about nociception. Then you have, but the nociception is also the pleasure receptor, right? So the pleasure of touch is separate than touch. It's a combination of nociception and touch. Temperature is another sense. Think about like you're in a bedroom and it's super cold. You're going to have a very different experience of your partner. Then
you have the best sleep.
Yeah, yep. You get good sleep, but perhaps for intimacy it might be a bit more challenging, right? But then there's proprioception, position, balance. So if I go to position, that would be, like for example, the position you have with your body is actually a sense in itself. So that is often dancers are very aware of that.
Yeah, Esteve, you're talking about this, and I'm thinking like my girlfriend and I have this ritual where if we're getting into a harder conversation, we always just like let's talk about this in bed, and we get into bed and we're curling up, and I'm big spoon, she's little spoon, but just the way you said that body position, I'm like, wow, we're actually in a fetal position, cuddled up, talking through our shit. And it just is something that I've never thought about until now. So it's so interesting. Yeah, continue, please.
And it triggers memory, just like smell. You smell something from your childhood and boom, you're back in your childhood. Same thing with position, right? There's a position, we don't think about this, but you go to work and you're crouched on your chair, like I get into my office mode in my position. It's going to trigger a mental pattern and a way of thinking and a way of actual relating and communicating as well. And then, of course, there's the sense of balance called the vestibular sense, which is to do with how it's your inner ear. It's the thing that makes you car sick or seasick, when there's a difference between what your eyes are seeing and what your body is feeling in balance. So the balance of you is also a sense which, for example, if you practice advanced tantra with yoga, there's a lot of that sense being brought in the Kama Sutra. Those sensorial playgrounds are very well known in the Asian traditions, but in the West we tend to sort of disregard them. And then the last one I would guess is, like the pre-last one is the movement, which I simplified to movement, but it's actually it's a combination of senses. Which again, if you think of intimacy in the bedroom, the movement is often associated with repetitive, and the whole porn idea of movement. But ultimately, it's also just, for example, dance. Like walking together, some people find it much easier to talk when they walk,
yes,
rather than stay static. So again, it's a sensorial thing. And the last sense, which is still under debate, there's actually a whole load of internal senses. One of them is what we're sort of investigating as the inner sense of intuition. There's actually a very interesting research on what they call in Asia the third eye, but actually there's some evidence that there's some biological cells in behind the forehead that are similar to what's in our eye. And there's investigation at the moment on chemoception, which is the sense of chemical wellness or unwellness in our body. So a lot of biohackers are investigating these inner senses, which are mostly unconscious. But again, if you think of the inner feeling, when people say I have a gut feeling or I feel good with this person, the chemistry between people is really important, and it's I think very under researched at the moment. I think we still need a few more decades of solid research before we can really talk about those senses. So there's a big dispute in the science world around how many actual senses we have, but we definitely have at least 10 plus. And the 5 is a shortcut because of the usual ones that we use. But so I was starting to go through these and thinking, okay, well, how do I hack those senses in terms of getting off the computer, building good rapport with my partner Anu, and having a great time, and not always go to the sort of sound and eyes senses that we default to because of technology.
Keep going.
So, yeah,
and have you made any progress on this, or how are things going in this research?
Well, the thing I found was initially complete by accident is that when we started looking at connection, you know this from your own work, is that when you name something, you actually have power over it. So when somebody has trauma, for example, often war veterans tend to not want to talk about their trauma. And they have this limiting belief that talking about it is giving it power. It's actually the other way around. Psychologically, when you name something, when you label it, when you externalize it and you say a part of me is feeling, or a part of me needs, my inner child needs, you're giving yourself power over it. Now, think of that in the context of connection. We have in English language a generally very poor language around the types of connection. So obviously, we say platonic love, like, love, and it's very sort of binary and poor, actually. So I started looking for a taxonomy, a list, and we know that the human memory load is 5 to 7 units, usually, easy recall. So I was looking for something in the realms of 5 to 7 types of connection that has the longest historical legs, that is the most reliable over our human experience collectively. And I found similar traces in both Asia and in Europe with a breakdown of 8 types of love. So I started looking at, if we name 8 types of connection, it doesn't mean they're true, because they're all constructs, they're all concepts anyway. It doesn't matter what the actual definition is. But the fact that 2 people in a relation have more than 1 or 2 words to describe how they connect gives them more control, more power, and therefore more playground on how they're going to negotiate boundaries, express their needs, fulfill their needs. And that's what I started exploring, because as an anthropologist, I'm always very much into what we call bubble traveling. So I don't just go into a theory, look at the abstract and read the theoreticals. I go and explore by talking to real people, myself trying things out. So I went into a lot of bubbles, like the Tantra world. I've been into all sorts of interesting relationship bubbles to understand what people do differently than the mainstream. And I started testing this vocabulary of 8 types of love with people who were in, I would say, extreme relations, whether it's open polyamorous relations, conscious BDSM, tantricas, sex workers, social workers. And they all were saying, yeah, well, of course, we can't just talk about love and intimacy. That doesn't help. So what do you use? And so I started to notice that the ones who had a better vocabulary were generally much more able to connect. Like, for example, I was interviewing this sex worker who was saying to me, well, when I have a client, I'm not going to just say, do you have particular boundaries? I'm going to go into specific naming of types of boundaries, giving them ways to negotiate the consent so that they can feel psychologically safe to express their needs. And so I started taking notes about this and realized that, yeah, actually, for my life, I'm defaulting to the same types of connection all the time, because that's what I've been brought up with. And those are either platonic love or more intimate sexual love, and I didn't have much of a playground. So this is where I started mapping those 8. and use those just for Anu and I to explore our own connection. And so what we do is that we just say, okay, for example, let's say we go out for a party. It's a dance party. There's some friends. It's not necessarily there's no intimacy, but let's say it's just a regular party. We don't want to be glued to each other all evening. We're going there to talk to people. So what we'll do is we'll do a check-in before, very quick, where I have this A4, and we have the 8 types of love, and I fold it on one side. I have mine. She does the other, sort of like hidden ballots, you know. And I go, what are my needs for tonight? And notice that it's needs for tonight, not my personality and my type of love as defined by Jaya's or whatever other system of personality mapping. It's actually just right now in this context, what do I need? Tonight I might need intimacy, some pragmatism, and some playfulness. And then I'll flip the paper, give it to her, and she'll do the same without knowing mine, so that she's not like influenced. And then we open the two together and we go, oh wow, actually we have the same needs. So we'll probably have the similar conversations with similar people. But we might have different needs. On hers, it might be that she wants really serious conversations with people, and I just want to have a giggle and talk and play and banter. And that allows us to not make drama out of differences of needs and go into it as two adults, not a parent-child kind of relation. And go, well, tonight I'm going to go and have fun and talk superficial banter while you go and have philosophical conversation with those friends. And that's fine, because I understand what your needs are. I respect you, and I respect that enough to actually encourage you to fulfill your needs with our previous relationship agreements. So that's how I've been exploring it on a very personal level. It's not just a theoretical, okay, I got this breakdown of types of connection, but they help to actually remove a lot of the drama of those sort of misunderstandings and conflicts that inevitably will happen in relationship to your partner.
Getting clear on expectations and understanding what you want to get out of each day, each week, understanding what your partner is hoping to get out of each day, each week, understanding how much gas they've got in the tank for you, for the relationship. Sometimes they want to go out and just let off some steam, and I completely feel that sometimes I want to go and have those big deep conversations with like other founders, like what are things that you're doing, and get into it and help and understand. And then other times you just want that banter, and I love that. And it is that people often talk about that feeling of going out on a lads' night, and I so see this. I've got my best friend coming to visit me. He's coming to Toronto with his football team, 16 lads, and we're gonna go out Friday, Saturday, brunch on Sunday. I can't wait. But all of this leads back into a question. Let's go through these 8 types of love. Please don't leave us hanging on anymore.
Sure. And I was actually gonna redo that video that I have on YouTube. That was just a quick download that I did a few years ago. But one thing I'll just mention before, just to keep the suspense right there, is that the big problem I'm noticing a lot in relations, now this is in relations in work and outside in couples, is that when people pay a lot of attention to who they are and their personality and who they are as a person, and they attach their sort of identity and ego to their needs, that's when problems happen. So like in a sense, the thing that unlocks is when we start to talk about a need and a behavior that's right now in the present moment, not because of who I was and who I am in the future, but right now I have a need. And it brings a huge amount of lightness and freedom, because let's imagine that I'm an introvert. In France I was labeled as an introvert. In Finland I'm labeled as an extrovert. It's context dependent. Now if I get attached to this idea that I'm an introvert, I'm going to behave differently than if I just go, right now, what do I need? I need to talk to people because I've been in COVID isolation. And that is difficult to do if we attach ourselves to who we think we are. So all these personality tests, all these things to do with who I think I am are useful to know oneself. But really what helps people to get along, in my experience, is just right now, what are your needs? And they can change. So yeah, I'll show you the 8. There's actually... I'll just draw it fresh because I'm noticing that the screen here is cutting part of the picture. Let's see if I can get, how much of the picture can you see?
I think I can see it all.
I'll just draw it like I currently think of it as if you think of a person as a stick figure and another person as a stick figure. Now, if we think of connection levels between them, really simplified, like tensions in a guitar string, if we go from the bottom up, and I'm now basically mixing the labels according to the Greeks, but how it connects to the Asian way of thinking of connection, and I'm referring specifically to the chakra system. There's some very interesting correlation between the Greeks' way of thinking and the ancient Indo-European cultures, like, for example, the chakra system in India. And if you look at those, they're essentially the same types of things talked about with different labels. So if we go from the bottom up, if anybody does yoga, they'll recognize the chakras. But the first one, the red chakra, would be actually in the labels of love, it would be storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, storge. And it's like, I like to think of them as how you say it to a person. You hear a person say, I respect you, or I know you. It's what you say to where you grew up. You have people in the in the town or village you grew up in. There's somebody that you've seen your whole life in the butcher, and you go there and you get your food and you say, oh, I know you from way back. It's a form of love that's to do with long term and knowing the person. So in a relationship, that's related to commitment often. That's related to somebody that you've known for a long time. In fact, it's often called familiar love. So you could connect on storge. That's the first one. The second one would be eros, which everybody knows the word because it's erotic. It would be equivalent to the orange chakra. So that's going to be also related to the idea of abundance, the feeling of abundance of, in a hedonistic sense, like enjoying life, being the emperor or the empress, like having a lot of great time. And it's not just about sexuality, it can also be an abundance of time, physical energy. So eros is a type of connection that one can have. Then there is the third one. I'm drawing it quite messily because I'm doing it fast, but mania. When people talk about mania, which is the yellow chakra, is often associated with passion, possessive love. So if storge is I know you, and if eros is I want you, I desire you, the mania is I need you. You could start looking. I was making playlists the other day with this. Think of all the songs where people say, "I need you. You're gonna. If you leave me, now I will die."
And the Greeks said, like, was it eros or mania, in which it was like one of them, it's going to be a passing phase, or like don't get too attached to this. I remember they had like advice around this and how to interact with this, right?
Well, mania is generally seen as one. They say that the one above mania, called philautia, is the one that one should focus on first, which is self-love. And mania is the one to pay attention to and to not cultivate. Yet, if you look at today's society, like even our marriage institution is actually regarding mania as a fundamental point in our relationship agreements. Like we base it on the fact that we need each other to fulfill each other's needs. Now that's like a fundamental bias in how we relate, because mania is quite dangerous. It can be very obsessive. It's nice to be the object of mania. If somebody is obsessive about you, it can be quite fun. But it's a trap often, because it creates this feeling of neediness, which doesn't necessarily account for my own responsibility in fulfilling my needs.
And if it's unrequited, it's very painful, right?
It's super painful, and it can lead to a lot of mental unwellness, like huge trauma. And so mania is not one that I would necessarily cultivate. It's one that can be used. It's also called the ego chakra in some way. It's the one that is about it's the solar plexus, it's the yellow, it's me, it's who I think I am, it's how I shine. It's great. But to be balanced out with the other is what the Greeks usually said, is like, don't give it too much attention, that mania. Are you able to read, or is it upside down on your side? It's still okay?
It's looking good.
Okay. So then this philautia, which is the one that today is really like needed in all relationships. We do coaching as well with relationships, and a lot of the people come to us and go like, I'm desperate for philautia, self-love. So it's like, I love and accept myself. And having a partner say, I choose you, accept you because you are looking after yourself is a great sign of mature relations, because if there's no room for philautia in a relationship, it can be very quickly suffocating. So philautia, the Greeks used to say, would be the condition for all the others. Like, you can't really connect with others if you haven't done self-empathy, self-compassion, and self-connection. So philautia is, I think, the unlocking. I love, accept, self is kind of the idea of this one. It's a bit messy.
It's very,
I'm gonna draw this later.
It's very powerful to... It's also like, I think about this, in which sometimes it's very important to also treat yourself how you'd want someone else to treat you. Like, give yourself that treatment that you dream of. Give it to yourself. And hopefully that makes sense, and people listening to this understand that. But I remember, like, in a long period, or a relatively long period of being single, I was like, I need to treat myself like in the way in which I want to be treated, to create a life in which I maintain this standard of treatment. Something that I found difficult to do while building a business. But it is, I think it's important, and I think it's something that we don't often reflect of. We want someone else to come in and swoop up us and take care of us and fulfill all our needs. But actually, guess what? You also need to be able to fulfill your own needs, because they might be actually different to the idea that you have in this black box like we've spoken about. And the practice of doing things for you, for looking after yourself, treating yourself with respect, builds up the evidence for the person that you want to be, so that you will find someone that fits this system that is already working to build up yourself. And even if you're in a relationship and you don't have this right now, you can start doing this, and it will improve your own self-worth, and I believe that it could improve the relationship with your partner too.
That is well said. And also, it's just that, you know, if we don't know our own needs and don't take full ownership of them, we can't set healthy boundaries. The big topic today with boundaries and saying no, and how do you receive a no, is really dependent on the ability of philautia. Like, if I don't love myself enough to say no, because everybody's needs is different. If I have a need for intimacy in a particular way, it doesn't mean that my next partner will have that same collection of needs. And the risk is that we tend to sort of project onto the other what we need and think that they also need the very same thing. So knowing your own needs is literally the fundamental. Like, take yourself on a date and see, what do you really want to do on your own self-date? And learn from that. I used to do that a lot when I was single. I was like, you know, go out with my journal, bit geeky, but, you know, to a cafe, go to a restaurant alone with a journal. Yeah. Most people feel awkward doing that, but it was wonderful. I then got to know that actually what I really wanted on my restaurant dates was a meaningful conversation with somebody, instead of going there for small talk. But then somebody else might want to go on a date and have small talk, and that's fine. But then I know that need, so then I know that when I'm dating, I'm going to be looking for somebody who's willing to have a meaningful conversation over dinner, as an example.
Even if you're in a relationship, we have something in Couply, it's called Date Yourself Day. So it's a date that gets sent, it's a date idea that gets sent out. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it is very fun if you just have a date yourself day, where you have a day where you do whatever the heck you want. And I can almost remember my favorite date myself days. I'm a hardcore sci-fi geek. I love sci-fi, and for me, going to the cinema, paying for those luxury seats, in Canada we have like these little mini luxury cinemas, paying for that, having a burger, watching a movie, amazing, best. Great.
It's a really healthy practice, because then you can turn up to the relation with part of your needs fulfilled and not expect the other to do that for you. So it's beautiful. Yeah. So then there's philia, which is what everybody calls friendship. Philia, and those two are connected. They're both the heart chakra. So they're the green. They're two different sides of the green. Some say one is pink, the other one is green. The inner and the outer part of the heart. But you know, the philia is I like you, essentially. It's like buddies. It's like companionship as well. It's like your football mates that are coming over. There's philia there, as well as probably other connections. So it's important to sort of separate as well, because sometimes we might actually confuse them. We might connect with people on 3 or 4 of those levels at one point in our relation, and then it shifts. So it might be that then you get, in an early stage relationship, there is this ludus. In French, we have libraries, and then we have play libraries, which are places where you borrow. Ludothèque in France is a place where you borrow games. It comes from ludus, playful creativity. So it's usually associated with the blue chakra, the chakra of expression, and it's when you say I enjoy you. You go bowling together. You do something fun, and if you combine ludus with eros, it becomes flirting in that usual sense that you play. So people tend to sort of bundle them and think, oh, obviously for me, eros is always going to be with ludus because that's how they've experienced it from their family or from their past. But what happens now is that when you start looking at it like this, you might just go, actually, I'm craving ludus. I have a lot of the eros, so I need to just find ways to be playful, and it's good for mental health to be a bit playful without it always being associated with eros. It could be, I could be philautically ludus, so that would be, I could play and go on my sci-fi date with myself, and that would be playful if I'm doing something that I can't like as a playfulness.
And this is like when, I mean, I see this in friendship. In friendship, you see this ludus in which you like in which you do silly things together. You know, when you set like a challenge. Like I was at a cottage with some friends recently, and there was this huge rock on the beach, and we were like, oh, I wonder how heavy this rock is. And it was a really big rock. It was like up to my thigh. We were trying to do the maths because we were like, okay, I can like kind of deadlift this, and so if I can like move it this much, and if 2 of us can pick it up together, then it's probably. And it was very, very playful. We were messing around, joking, and then we wanted to try and pick it up, and it was ended up wasting like a lot of time, but it was hilarious. It was all banter, and it was that sort of playful. This kind of like playful experience, or when you do something, when you go paintballing with your friends, right? It is that very playful, but also a little bit of a feeling of brotherhood because you're kind of getting something done, right? And that's the feeling. And I think in your YouTube video you speak about this, in which like athletes will experience this brotherhood, military people will experience this love for military. Within people who are in their regiment. And I know we're looking at from a male perspective here, and I'm sure like the female perspective is the same thing, but it that's the kind of connection it is.
I mean, ludus, again, they're often, because people don't have this vocabulary, they just bundle them. So generally, for example, philia, which is the friendship, can be associated with having fun. Like ludus is also video games, it's playing games together, it's also creating, it's being artistic, it's music. A really great example of non-gendered ludus is musicians. You see musicians who play together who've never met. I used to play drums. I used to drum in the streets of London, and I would sit under the bridge in Camden Market, and I'd wait 10 minutes, and there'd be already 20 people coming and joining in. And those people I would not even speak the same language with, but we'd have a connection, a really great connection on ludus, because they're fellow musicians, so we're just jamming, you know. And that's also ludus. It's creative, it's musical, it's artistic, and it's also, of course, any form of game and play that people play. Online video games, you could have people who are on a ludus all the time, and there's often philia connected to them. So yeah, it's a pragma. Pragma is the one that people often forget, but pragma is what we call pragmatic. So it's usually often associated with platonic love. It doesn't have to be, but pragma is where it's about the love of wisdom. So it's a philosophical connection. It's like it's your mentor. It's when you have your teacher. It's the old woman in the village that talks about the wisdom of the ancients. It's also it's the moment when you have that really great mind level connection with somebody. There might not be any other levels of connection, but pragma is when you say, on a relationship level, I choose you. Notice, like, this comes from talking to a lot of people who relate to each other in the Asian perspective, which is the arranged marriages, or in some way the very pragmatic way to choose a partner is not just because there's a chemical attraction. It's because I just choose that I'm going to make this work with you, and I learn to love you. I choose to love you. I choose you is a very powerful statement of love, because it's not based on neediness of mania. I can say I choose you even if you don't fulfill my needs. That's a really sort of like profound way of saying I acknowledge that you don't fulfill my whole set of needs, but I still choose you. That's another statement of love.
The thing that flags to me here as well is it's almost like the deep feeling of the connection that you feel with mentors. So like growing up, I'd say like didn't go to a good school, didn't really have any like outside of my dad, I knew zero male role models that I would like say that I could connect with or know. I didn't know a single one actually. It was only when I started discovering more of like the traditional self-help stuff that it just spoke to me so deeply. And for me, it was like borrowing a Tony Robbins cassette from the library, or like reading like but I just remember like that feeling of connecting with someone, and then later like listening to some of Jordan Peterson's stuff at really like pivotal moments in my life where I needed just like a mentor. And then that feeling of connection you have with someone where they are giving you a kick up the arse, like really pushing you to be a better person. That is a really interesting feeling of connection. And if you've ever had like an amazing boss, like when I worked at the Red Cross, I had just such an incredible leader who I could just, the way that she would make decisions, I just loved. You just are like, this person's amazing. And I guess it's that sort of feeling. It's like mixed with a lot of respect and mentorship.
Yeah, and pragma is like the word wisdom in this case is not knowledge. It's also the intuitive, internal knowledge that you gather by experience, by trying things out. And pragma is when you connect with someone on a pragma level. If it's only the pragma, that could be also an imaginary person that's dead. Like, you know, you could have a relation with an author that from another century. Like at the moment, I'm in connection with this author. This is my current reading, Rutger Bregman. So he's writing about the fundamental human nature. He's coming at the whole current narrative, which is very toxic, about humans are bad and evil, and there's the whole cynicism about humans. And he's writing, no, evidence shows us that humans are actually not such a bad species. And so I read it and I feel really good about being a human, and it helps me be a better relationship to myself before I'm even in relation to others. And that's, I'm having a pragmatic relation with this person who I've never met. So pragma can be often if you have a relationship, you often talk to your partner in your head.
Yeah.
What does my partner think I would do or say? And you have this internal dialogue with your partner. That's pragma.
I'm like thinking about my bookshelf here, and it's obviously out of shot, but I have a large bookshelf, and I think of really, this was like the element that really got Couply going, because I had the relationship with all of these authors that had written these incredible books about relationships, the Gottmans, the Gary Chapmans, the Esther Perels, all of these awesome authors, and feeling like, oh goodness, like these are my mentors in relationships, and they've been so amazing for me and changed everything for me, so that I feel like I've learned so much and have such a better framework, better language, better understanding. How can I bring this learning? What are my skills to bring this learning and push it to me 10 years ago, or me 5 years ago, when I was going through a divorce and I felt like I'd lost touch and I was out at the ocean, I didn't know what I was doing, or I just felt like I'd lost the connection. How can I bring that? So it's really interesting. Like you say, you track these mentors that you've had and you have that love for them. Like Esther Perel, I always, like, as soon as she has something, I listen to it and I'm just like, oh great, I'm going to get to spend an hour with Esther. Obviously she doesn't know me yet, but really feels like she's a mentor. And she is. She feels like she's a mentor. And another great podcaster, Dr. Jessica, who I'd listened to for so long, and then meeting her was really weird because I felt like I knew her so well, but she obviously didn't know who I was.
Well, this is exactly it, and I mean, you know, we are the product of who we relate to, not just in reality, but in our head. So if you were able to measure exactly what your internal self-talk is doing, 24/7, which would be a bad idea, and it's impossible. But if we were to do that, who are the 5 to 10 people that you talk to most in your head are affecting you most? Therefore, it takes sort of a bit of conscious awareness to go, well, who do I want to relate and connect to in that internal narrative that are going to help me evolve to where I want to be and not just be the same as I was, because it's it wouldn't change the pattern if I keep relating to my mum and my dad the same way. So that's where the new relations and new readings or new people, new encounters. And I think the last one I'll just add on top, so we have our set, is Agape, which has been borrowed in the last 2,000 years by Christianity, by relabeling it as what they call sort of spiritual love. But it's actually, in its essence, it's about unconditional love. So it's the connection you feel when you look at a sunset, and you're looking at this beautiful, the sun's going down, it's just gorgeous, and you feel this emotion inside that is not an attachment or a neediness of any kind. It's just a feeling of at oneness with. It's often connected to spirituality because it's an undemanding love. It's just, I just love, and it's often very weird, and it comes later in life for most people.
Yeah.
But in a relationship that can be cultivated, the agape, the love of the other, just because you could say it's like Avatar. In Avatar they say, I see you.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you have a child who just goes, Daddy, Daddy, look at me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah. Is it unconditional? Is this similar to parental love, or like love you have for like your nephew children, or is that different?
You could. I mean, of course, a lot of the time, storge and agape are connected. Agape is the sort of unconditional, in the sense that not many parents are unconditional. Actually, they're unconditional up to a certain point. It's like they're unconditional, but so storge is often what people feel in families. Like, I know you because I've always cared for you. I've done the whole childhood thing with you. So I love you because I know you and I'm familiar with you. It doesn't necessarily come to the same as agape. You can have both together. Like, all of them can combine. Like in harmonics in music, you can have lots of interesting combinations.
Got it.
But I think when you look at agape on its own, that if you look at the polyamoric world, for example, it's a really interesting blind spot. People talk about jealousy. And when you start looking at people's narratives about it, there's always the opposite of. What's the opposite of jealousy?
Right, it is. The opposite of jealousy is when you have love for the other person's love. Is that right?
You have a love without the condition that they need to fulfill your needs while they're loving other people. So, for example, if you look at polyamory and you look at the swinging circles, people who are able to cultivate the agape, which in the 17th century in France they used to call it compersion. You can look at Wikipedia; they have a little section on it. Compersion is basically the official etymological opposite of jealousy. It means that you, instead of getting triggered by somebody having intimacy with somebody else, you actually get love inside you for it. You feel fulfilled and loving about that, and it's a form of agape, actually. Now, it's really hard to see, and it's very rare, because generally our ego and our needs come in and just go, oi, I need to be seen, see me, but it is possible, and I've seen that in some very, very, very beautiful relations out there, that people can actually cultivate agape and seeing each other despite their differences in needs and behaviors and everything. Amazing. So those are the 8. Now, how does that work in practice? Generally, what I've been testing is this. Take them as a vocabulary. So it's just like, my brother is a therapist. We talk a lot about his therapy cases. He does a lot of couple therapy. And we talk without breaking the medical secret, of course, but he'll talk about a case and he uses this vocabulary to describe the nature of a relation between two people. So it's like, okay, so she was really manic, and she had a lot of the Ludus and Philia needs for philautia that were unfulfilled. There was 0 eros, and he was really manic, and there was a lot of eros. What do you think they could be doing about it? We can talk about it as a diagnostic. But it also can be useful in a relationship to just have a sort of checking about where you are, like what are your needs right now? Because I could say to Anu, right now I'm really tired tonight, I just need some philautia, which means me time. And she'll go, okay, I respect your need for philautia, so you know what, I'm going to have a girls' night out and you can just watch TV, do whatever you want.
Yes.
And no friction, because we've just been clear about the needs without it being confused. There's not me time because I'm upset with her, or it's just philautia is on the table.
There is no scoring of positives and negatives. There's no like it's no zero-sum game going on, that because you need this, that means she doesn't get that. We've really worked on this as well. My girlfriend and I've worked on this. I've spoken to this before. We have like for events and social commitments, we have the like compulsory, encouraged, optional, and then like highly optional. And we always have that. So it's like, hey, my friend is getting married. This is an ask, but it's a compulsory one. We're going to need to put this in the diary. Like, it's really important to me that you're there. And then it's like, hey, this thing's happening. I'd really appreciate it if you would attend with me. It's my company Christmas party, but it's not like absolutely compulsory, but like, I'd really love it if you can come. But if you really don't have the energy or you can't do it, I understand. And then it's like the other ones, but having that clearly communicated is advanced, because a lot of people would take it extremely personally when they think, no, I want my partner to want to go to me to everything, and so if they don't want to, I'll put it as a test, and I'm going to use it as a relationship test, and then it's a pass or fail, and then when they fail, there's going to be consequences to that, and it's a completely different framework of thinking. But it's a challenge. I think it's a real challenge for people to get there, because their ego is being hurt. But using this framework, you can understand it's like, hey, they might not have that type, or they might have a different need of a different type of connection in that moment.
I mean, you use the word ego. I just want to just pause a second and redefine ego in the context of human interactions, because you know, there's a lot of people using the word, and I think it's still an unknown in the sense that identity, if we talk about ego as identity that comes from comparing, so comparing in our heads or in real language between you and another person, be it better or worse. So I am more than or less than. So I am more, for example, I am more masculine than you, or something, or more happy, or more educated, and you can measure this on dozens and dozens of different levels, like physical attributes, gender, social attributes, how I'm good for the world, intellectual attributes, like, for example, my IQ or my qualifications. And on a spiritual level, those are the most difficult ego triggers, which are differences in for example, values and beliefs and spiritual practices. Now, whatever the level of ego, the problem is not the ego, as Ryan Holiday puts it in his book, but it's actually how we relate to. So if we take the metaphor of a vehicle, if we think of ego as a car, the ego is a social vehicle. It helps us to get along with other people. We can't have socializing without ego, because people always have to simplify and go like, okay, they put you in a box of this, that, and the other. And it's okay. The thing is, the problem is not the car, it's how we drive that vehicle and how we relate to. So if I go home and I drive the car into the garage, and I take the car keys and I put them in the basket and I go, that's just the car, it's not me. My ego is not me, it's just the vehicle. I'm safe. I can distance myself from it. That's what we measure in our technology at the moment, is we measure ego distance. And that's usually measured by humor to oneself, self-deprecating humor. Can I laugh at my ego triggers? The more I'm able to laugh at myself, the more I'm detached and safe. But if I can't laugh at a part of me, any of those connections, by the way, if there's one that I can't laugh at, it means that I am the car. It's not the car, it's me. And when I am the car, it's like on the motorway, when you have a person who's just getting like, and it's just really difficult, because you can't actually do anything, because they are taking everything personally. So the fundamental skill for this to even begin to be useful is ego detachment. Like, can I step back and go, my needs, my ego, my identification on anything, whether I identify through being a personality type, a type of love, for example, I talk a lot with people around Jaya's types of love, I'm this type of person. Doesn't matter, whatever you identify as. as long as you're not taking it so seriously that when somebody talks about it, it becomes their problem and it becomes a conflict. Right. So like if you can get away from the car and say, I'm not sitting in the garage all night with Instagram pictures of me in the car, I'm just going to sleep. If we can do that with our egos, then literally the playground opens up to infinity, because all those types of connection, think of eros, generally that's where the ego triggers are. When people start to make relationship agreements, they usually start with erotic intimacy rules, and they take them very seriously because their ego triggers around that. So the cultivation here, like as a relation or even just with oneself, is to just see what parts of me, of my ego, can I not laugh at right now, are the ones that I need to sort of go, okay, well, why can't I laugh about it? What is it that's unfulfilled? What's the pain or need that hasn't been, you know? And so whatever you do when you start opening up these levels, it does require us to be able to not take it too seriously. And like, for example, I've had debates with people about how these should be labeled. It doesn't matter as long as you agree with your partner in an agreement that you're meaning the same thing. But if we start to create identity out of, oh, well, I have more mental models than you to talk about relationships, so I'm better than you, and then I start to take myself so seriously that we get in a fight, that's counterproductive, right?
Yeah, it is having this shared framework, shared language, and this meta conversation about your relationship and your communication. That's the thing that we've noticed that has been the big switch for people that use Couply, is that they start to have conversations about their conversations, and they start to have conversations about their relationship. And you move out of the car, because at first you're just in this car in the relationship and you are both in it, and you start to get distanced, and then you're right, and you don't know where you're driving to, and that car can crash. But if you're having conversations around the journey that you want to go on, what your vehicle is going to be like, and you're designing it together, then that is a vehicle that will be on a long and beautiful journey. And it is these moments, like you say, of pulling yourself out of the driver's seat, taking a second to walk around and design it. And guess what? People listening to this, and well done. You're like an hour deep into some super advanced stuff, but hopefully this is motivating for you to go and just consciously create this relationship with your partner, do it in a loving way. And now we have like so many more tools to think about how to deeply get this message across with our partner, like the 11 senses. I love this. It just makes it very interesting to think of all these additional things that you can trigger to deepen the connection and have these like more conscious communications with your partner. And I think this is super cool, Esteve. Thank you for like walking us through this. This is like amazing.
And you know, like if I geek out on this, what I do is I take this and I go, how does this map to the 11 senses? Like, how do I experience Ludus with balance? How do I experience Ludus with smell? It opens up like really weird questions to actually be creative with activities as a partner, because sometimes you can fall into the same. So you can be like, okay, how am I going to play with smell? Oh, interesting. Where do we go? What do we do?
It makes me think of some really like happy memories that I've had. And I was thinking about this actually on a walk this morning, in which I was thinking, like, when have I seen my partner the most happy? It's her birthday coming up, and I'm just like, when is she the most happy? And we did something ridiculous, and it was a family Olympics with my girlfriend's family and like another family that they've grown up with, basically. And there's so many of them that we can do a full-blown Olympic Games. And it was this laughter of like replaying it was like a Mario game where you had to like grab the flag from someone, and you could, but it is like the balance. It's movement. You're with your childhood friends. You're being so silly. We're wearing different T-shirts. There's different color there. You're looking different, acting different. And it was hysterical. It was so funny. Like, we were like rolling on the floor, dying as we were playing like this game where you have to like basically pull a flag out of someone's back pocket, and it was everyone versus everyone. So it was all wild and crazy, but it was so funny, and it is bringing in these different elements, and there's balance. Like, you're running around, you're moving your body in a different way. So it's super cool. This is super cool.
And another food for thought, like, everybody's playing around with ChatGPT and seeing what you can do with prompts. I've been obviously trying out and seeing how it can help personal relations and also internal narrative. How does it help personal growth? Most of the time people have relationship agreements that are either very traditional, like a wedding, marriage, traditional, or they only make an agreement once and they don't renegotiate it. Now, what we've been testing with Anu is that we take this as a relationship agreement structure. So we have a Google Doc, and every 6 months, we're basically revisiting it and going, what are agreements under Agape, Pragma, Ludus, Philia, philautia, Mania, eros, and storge? And obviously, there might be more agreements under one, like eros. There might be more rules that we agree to. But I'm using this also as a framework to think more widely about the types of connection. I might say with her, okay, we have this agreement that, around intimacy and eros, we might have these rules, but with Mania, we don't have the same rules. And it creates a framework that allows us to update our relationship agreement. Any therapist will tell you how important it is to not just keep it static and to be able to have a conversation about needs. Now, try that in ChatGPT. Just go, if you describe those, you can take the simple definition from Wikipedia and you go, there's the 8 types of love in Wikipedia. You just go, based on the 8 types of Greek love, which I described below, what are the relationship agreements that I should negotiate with my partner, and start to play around with ChatGPT on that. It's quite interesting to see that we have so many untapped ways of connecting when we are usually in the I love you, I like you kind of dimension of love. So yeah, it does open up new levels to the video game.
Amazing. Awesome. Wow. What a fantastic conversation. Esteve, thank you so much for your knowledge and wisdom. It has been such a pleasure to have you on, and such a unique and different kind of viewpoint. And I love this. And I think our audience is going to get a huge kick out of this as well. It's definitely broadened my horizons. And I haven't really read this anywhere else. And I've done quite a lot of reading on the relationship stuff. So I love how new and unique this is. For the Couply community, where can they reach you? How can they stay in touch?
Thank you for voicing that. Green Elephant is where I'm sitting at the moment. I'm working for greenelephant.org, greenelephant.org. We have a YouTube channel. We believe in open source, so all of the learning content is entirely free. The 8 types of love is better drawn on a doodle video that is on our YouTube channel. So if anybody wants to keep getting that level of intensity in their ears and eyes, then YouTube channel is there. We also have a whole library of resources on our website, and of course we do coaching and things like that, trainings, coaching, and measuring people's communication as well. So greenelephant.org. I'm pretty sure you'll have the links in your summary of the show today. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Esteve, thank you so much again. It has been an absolute delight having you on this show.